Okay, we're live, we're recording, and I am at the end of a session here, but I actually need to go back to another session here at our Southwest ACSM.
So it's so funny. Last weekend I was in California, you're in Nevada. Now it's the exact opposite.
Right.
We're just playing musical states.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm over in Costa Mesa, and yeah, it's nice. I was able to get out for a run this morning, and it was it was cool, but comfortable.
I love running down there. Tell me you ran on the back bay.
I did not, because I'm still about 10 miles from that area. So I don't have a car here. I flew over into John Wayne, and usually I walk from John Wayne to the hotel, but I did catch the shuttle this time. So, because I think we were doing our other podcast with our faculty member. So, but okay, so I'm at this conference, American College of Sports Medicine Regional Conference. I was sitting in a presentation, and I'm going to throw a number at you that I think you're going to be amazed. So Dr. Gladden, who actually is the ACSM president, gave a presentation, and he was calculating how much ATP you use in the marathon. And specifically, he was looking at Kipchoge and how much ATP Kipchoge would have used to do this sub-2-hour marathon.
Okay.
Right now, I
so
think
we're talking about units of ATP.
ATP. Okay. Now ATP, I think our audience is pretty well versed in this, but let me just quickly, ATP is adenosine triphosphate. That's the substance that allows muscle to contract. And that's the universal currency of allowing muscle to contract. So everything that we talk about in terms of aerobic pathways or anaerobic pathways, that's all about producing
ATP, right?
Yeah, that's right. Because we don't have a lot of ATP in us right now. If we used all our ATP right now, it probably will only last a second, or maybe 3, but really about a second. Right? So
so how many used? So now you really do actually have me excited.
Yeah, and I was, I'm sitting there, and he's going through the whole math. He went through the whole math. It probably took him about 30 minutes to get to this number. And he calculated based upon rate of oxygen consumption, how much you're breathing, how much oxygen you're using, how much fat you use, how much carbohydrate you use during a marathon.
So we're assuming with Kipchoge, he is somewhat using more glycolysis. Is that
so?
He's going.
Yeah, that's good. So the number that he used to make this calculation was based upon some measurements. Now, they don't have the exact measurements during the sub-2, obviously, because there wasn't wearing any metabolic equipment. But based upon some other measurements they did at other times, the RER came out to about 0.92.
Yeah, so he's quite glycolytic.
That's right. So a 1 is all carbohydrate, and a 0.7 would be all fat. So 0.92 is using more carbohydrates than fats during that type of run that he did to do the sub-2.
Isn't that amazing, that number, that number, like he is 0.92. So basically like it's in the 90% of it is coming from carbohydrates, right?
Yep. And he was running about 90% of his VO2 max for that sub-2 event he did. All right, so we talk about how many calories to take in during a race, and that can be anywhere from 100 to 300, depending on maybe even 400. Grams of carbohydrate. We talk about trying to get in 60 to 100 grams per hour. ATP, you only have enough for 1 second.
Just sitting here,
yeah. If you got up and ran out and you used all your ATP, you'd last 1 second. He calculated 56 kilograms of ATP. All right, so 56 kilograms. Okay, so how much do you weigh in kilograms?
60, mid-60s.
It's your body weight. I mean, I'm 80 kilograms, 100. Well, I'm not 180 pounds, but I'll say 80 kilograms, which is 180 pounds. I'm a little bit heavy right now. So he calculated 56 kilograms of ATP, which is in essence the body weight of Kipchoge. And so the interesting message of that was ATP is not a very efficient way to store energy.
Oh, not at all.
No,
Yeah.
and so that's why that's one of the reasons why you use carbohydrates and fats to produce ATP along the way, because your fat is very efficient in storing energy, and carbohydrates the next efficient for storing energy. And so it's better to store those things and then have pathways to break it down to produce ATP, and then use the ATP right away for muscle contraction.
Wow.
So I was blown away.
That blows my mind. Now, and John, I know we weren't planning on going down this road, but I have to ask, does that include the ATP that you actually put into the system for glycolysis?
Yeah, that's right. So he went, and again, he did 30 minutes.
We went all the way. It wasn't just the resultant. It was and I know we're going down this physiologic pathway that is pretty deep stuff, but it actually takes ATP to make ATP.
Well,
especially on the glycolytic side.
That's right. It does. That's a good way of putting it. And he also accounted for proteins and all this. And this does come back into play to what we're going to talk about now, because this is going to ultimately come back to when you run a race, you are in essence using mass. You're losing mass during that race. And so, obviously 56 kilograms, if you weigh that much, it's not going to, that can't happen. You can't lose that much, but that's why.
But you're bringing in mass, which people
you're bringing in mass, or you're using some of the mass, the stored fat and stored carbohydrate more.
People forget that oxygen actually has weight.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah.
And when you breathe out carbon dioxide. Well, carbon actually has weight. Mm-hmm. So you're bringing in mass and you're expelling mass all of the time. Yeah. People probably don't know this, but that's actually how you lose weight, is by actually expelling carbon dioxide.
Yeah, right.
And it's the carbon molecules that are the mass that you end up losing. It doesn't just go off into space. Like, it actually is something you can truly measure. And so this is fascinating to me, because really, how much body weight did he lose?
Yeah, right. And he didn't have that, but that would be interesting to know what his mass was in the beginning and what it was.
We can kind of guess it's going to be, if he, let's say, weighs 120 pounds, 130 pounds.
130 it was, yeah.
Okay, so let's hypothetically say he lost 8% of his body mass, so maybe he lost 10 pounds of his body mass. So then if he utilized that much weight of ATP, I mean, this is some such cool math, but deep stuff.
And that's where it's going to get to what we want to talk about with hydration, is when you're at the end of the marathon, you want to be as light as possible.
Yeah, but it's a fine line, right? It's a fine line, and there's a lot of pieces to get to that. But you're absolutely right.
And the lost mass is not just water. That's the other part that I think is a neat takeaway. That lost mass at the end of a marathon is you've lost some stored fat, you've lost some stored carbohydrate, because that is mass that you're using to generate ATP. Remember, we don't hold on to that ATP. We don't store that 56 kilograms. It gets produced and then it gets used right away. It's
not all just water you lose. You're absolutely right. And oftentimes we overlook that, and we think that when we do weigh in and weigh out, it is just water. And it's not just water. You're absolutely correct. So, John, we're going to talk about some myths of hydration and some controversies in hydration. When you think about it, just from a high level of doing triathlon, doing in particular longer distance triathlon, okay? Because I know you did a sprint race last week. You literally could have went the entire way without having a drink.
I didn't take anything with me.
And honestly, like, when I did a sprint triathlon, I take maybe 1 cup of water at an aid station, I throw it in my face. That's it for me. But when we go longer, we actually do need to. No, we don't need to, but preferentially, we're going to take in some fluids. And if we go really long, we really do have to take in some fluids. So when you think about it, what's why do we have to take in fluids when we go long? What in your understanding, if someone's to ask you that, like, we had a triathlete that say, hey, why do I need to take in water? What's the main reason?
my bias is exercise in the heat because we live in Las Vegas. And so what I always talk about first and foremost with hydration is maintaining core body temperature.
Yeah.
And so one of the reasons why we really need to focus on taking in hydration, especially during the summer months of Las Vegas, is to allow our sweating mechanism to operate properly in order to maintain core temperature. And that, in that context, you take in hydration to maintain core body temperature. Now, there's some other physiological reasons why you take in hydration during cold or during when you're not worried about a rise in core temperature. But remember, every time we're contracting muscle, we're taking chemical energy, transforming it to mechanical energy, and that's only 30% efficient. The other 70%,
if we're lucky.
That's right, if we're lucky. The other 70% is going off as heat. So we're generating a lot of heat. So even when I was running this morning here in Costa Mesa, I'm still sweating. It's 50, 60 degrees. I'm still sweating. And because I'm building up that heat while I run. And so even in cooler temperatures, you still need to maintain that hydration level a lot to allow the sweating mechanism. But it's also a matter of maintaining blood volume as well to allow for the movement of fats to the muscle. In order to allow the movement of carbohydrates from the liver to the muscle, you need that blood volume. And so that's the other real core physiological reason for drinking during any temperature environment.
So let me ask you this. You did Norseman. Congratulations on that. You got a black shirt. You get the black shirt to prove it. Very cold race.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Can you remember how much you drank? Was it significant?
Yes and no, but I think with the critical piece of that is I was keeping my hydration plan separate from my fueling plan.
Good.
Because, and we talked about this with Ironman California being potentially colder, but sorry.
It was really cold, by the way. It was.
And you were smart to think about changing your concentration of your bottle that carried your calories, because you knew you weren't going to be taking in as much hydration because it's going to be cooler. So you don't have that need, but you still need the calories. And so that's really the same thing with Norseman, is thinking more about putting my hydration in one bucket and my calories in another bucket. How much I drank, I don't remember, to tell you the truth. But in the cold, it's not the calories.
But yeah, exactly. So in the cold, it's not going to really make much of a difference physiologically as far as temperature. It really isn't. And so I think what I think of when I think of hydration is it is always a sliding scale based off of ambient temperature, wet bulb globe temperature. I mean, where we look at radiant heating, we look at air temperature, we look at humidity, all of these things play into this.
Mm-hmm.
And it is always a sliding scale. So if someone was to ask me, said, hey, Ted, I'm going to do this race, what should my hydration plan be?
Mm-hmm.
It is 100% determined by, in my mind, by the conditions.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like you said, it also, I look at hydration as a conduit for fuel. Right. Because it really is the easiest way for us to get carbohydrates in, is in a fluid form of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really think that these are some big high level picture things that I think we should, obviously we're starting out with this.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, in Las Vegas, in the winter, which we're coming into, you go for a 4 or 5 hour bike ride, you might be able to be just fine with 2 bottles of water, or 2 bottles of fluid.
Yeah.
Right. In the summer, it might be 10.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And we're just talking training. We're not even talking, race intensity. And actually, that's the other thing I think that's really important to understand, is race intensity makes a huge difference as well.
That's right.
Right. Because the faster you race, or the more energy you put out when you race. So if it's running, it's pretty easy to know the speed. But if it's on the bike, same thing, wattage output. The more output you have, the higher your temperature goes. It is without a doubt. And in response to that, the more sweat you will have. So that's another piece of this. So if you have, let's say we're talking about a half Ironman, you have somebody that's going to finish in 8 hours, or that's going to finish in 5 hours, or 4, let's say 4, some like a pro, really fast. The person that's the pro will have a higher core temperature and will sweat more per hour, significantly more per hour than the person that is going slower, even if their perceived exertion is the same, right? So they both feel like they're working at the same, like, let's say they both feel like they're working 8 or 9 out of 10. So we have to put that into our calculations, as well as is how fast this person is moving and how, basically how many watts they're exerting, right? And and you mentioned about the when we started out, we're talking about ATP and utilizing ATP, that, and then the efficiency, and you're only getting so much out of this. Kipchoge is working, and burning that amount of energy, and he's going to be producing way more heat as a byproduct than somebody that's going half the speed. And I think that's important to also understand. And where people run into problems is they're the 8-hour half Ironman person, and they're trying to fuel and they're trying to hydrate like someone that's doing 4 hours, because they read on a blog that Jan Frodeno drinks this much per hour. And they're like, oh, well, if he's doing it, I should do it. And it's, once again, it's apples and oranges. And that's why hydration needs to be individualized.
Yeah. I mean, Lionel Sanders has put out a lot of information about what he does, and he has an extremely high sweat rate. And so he's trying to take in an extremely high amount of fluids. But that's someone who's exercising a very different level than us.
And he's a bigger person too, which also does make a difference.
Yeah.
Actual size makes a difference. And then I would also say, we're going to talk about biases in a little bit. He is sponsored by Gatorade.
Oh, there you go.
Right? No, he is. That's one of his main sponsors.
Yeah.
And so, how much of what he's actually saying is true, or is it marketing?
Right. That's right.
And that's the problem with professional athletes or people that are sponsored by companies. We may not be getting the full picture. And so I think that's ultimately pretty important. And we were off the air and we're talking about ACSM and the National Athletic Trainers Association and some of their position statements. But one of the things that both of them kind of come to the conclusion is that it needs to be individualized. And this is not a one size fits all problem.
Well, okay. So what's interesting is, back in the early 1900s, they weren't taking any fluid in, and they weren't taking any carbohydrate in during a marathon.
Yeah, because that was the sign of you're better.
That's right. And so, the class I'm teaching right now is Physiology of Endurance Performance. I use The Lore of Running as the textbook for it. And I like it because it's written by Tim Noakes, who really is a well-known physiologist in general. And he's written about this. And what's amazing is how quickly the pendulum swung from, hey, you don't need to drink anything, to where you got to be drinking every mile. And then he started bringing up this issue of hyponatremia, where people are basically drinking too much of something, and that something doesn't have enough electrolyte in it. Whatever the drink is, you're drinking too much of it. You're not exercising hard enough, so you're not using your sweat rate to keep the fluids moving, and so you end up disrupting the balance of salt within the fluid, and that's called hyponatremia, low sodium within the system, because you've diluted it so much. And so the people at most risk of that are the ones who are doing a marathon in 5 hours or 6 hours, because they have a chance to go through the aid station and drink. Because why? Because they are marketed to drink, to fuel. And so this is exactly what you're talking about, is this conflict of interest with, companies that are really promoting, drink to succeed. That's not always the case. You got to find the right amount to drink, and over drinking is not going to help you, especially because if you're just taking on extra weight, you're just weighing more.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and obviously that book is fabulous. and in some of his work has been absolutely groundbreaking. But he is still fighting, and we're all like, even for me as an athletic trainer, I am fighting marketing.
Yeah.
And I'm fighting not just marketing, I'm fighting companies that are sponsoring athletes and sponsoring teams. Even at our university, Powerade is the sponsor, or Gatorade's been the sponsor, and we're pushing this agenda on athletes, and athletes believe that they need to be just drink, and it's simply not true, right? You can do, like you said, you can do a marathon and not drink. Well, in some very extreme cases, like super high humidity, super high temperature, maybe you might not finish. But here's the thing, you're not going to die. And I think that's important to understand too. And I think it's in Noakes's book, and even more recent stuff. You cannot, at least I cannot, maybe some people can, find athletes who have died of dehydration.
Yeah, no, and this is an important point to distinguish. If you are going to die in a hot marathon, you're going to die from a high core temperature.
Yeah.
And you may be dehydrated at the same time, meaning that your sweat mechanism may not be working well, but you're not dying from dehydration, you're dying from a high core temperature. And that's a critical distinction. Noakes actually talks about you're at a greater risk of dying from hyponatremia than dehydration.
Way greater. It's not, like I said, I can't find a case in the athletic literature of an athlete dying of dehydration. Yes, heat stroke, but hyponatremia, there's many cases of it. And there's even people that don't die having long-term disability because of it. So you're right. It is important to understand that dehydration can lead to heat stroke, but it's only one factor.
Right.
And even like the students I teach, they're like, oh, well, we have to make sure our athletes drink because it prevents heat stroke. I'm like, yeah, what are the other factors that contribute to heat stroke? And let's address those as well. And let's address those appropriately. And then let's give fluids appropriately and not too much of those fluids. So, and I know we weren't necessarily going to go down the heat stroke, but chronic dehydration can lead to heat stroke, right? So many days in a row of being depleted can lead to heat stroke. But we're actually seeing a lot of the other things are people coming into competition with a temperature. So you have a low-grade fever and you don't recognize it. Right. So if you start exercise at 101 degrees, for example, you don't have as far to go and your cooling mechanisms aren't working as well. Wearing equipment also can increase core temperature. In particular, in football, American football is where it's probably this is most pronounced. Wearing pads and helmets traps heat and doesn't allow for cooling. So we need to look at other factors. Right.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the comments here. Max has reminded me to mention the central governor theory, because this is where you're going as well. Is the central governor theory is really from Noakes, and his hypothesis is that there's something the brain is detecting, and then the brain starts shutting things down. It's not a conscious decision, but the brain starts detecting something, and so you have these governors, and a governor, people may have rented a car with a governor, and you can only push on the gas pedal so fast and it won't go any faster because there's a speed governor on the rental car. So governor is a limiter in this case. And so, even when you become dehydrated, there's an idea that there's a governor that what's happening is your brain will tell you to start slowing down, start to stop generating more heat through muscle contraction, because your core temperature is going up. So your brain may be detecting core temperature changes and then starting to shut things down because you're becoming dehydrated. But you're right, the dehydration, what typically happens is when someone does become dehydrated, they slow down and stop exercising. And because that is one of the contributing factors to building up heat is the muscle contraction. So spot on. And then there's other things like equipment and radiant heat and all this that is also going to be built into that. So no, it's a really interesting phenomenon. But the dehydration itself is not the precipitating factor that's leading to death.
I could not agree more. And here's the thing: is that when you start to become dehydrated, there is some central governor stuff, but there also is physiologic things, right?
Yeah.
So as you're becoming dehydrated, your core temperature will start to rise.
Yeah.
And one of the papers we read to prepare for this basically said, basically when you got, so for 0.22 degrees Celsius increase, your heart beats 6 minutes per minute faster.
Yep.
Right. So if you think about that, you're starting to work harder.
That's right. Because you have less blood volume.
Exactly.
You've got to get that blood volume. Okay, now I need to put a little asterisk here. Dehydration is dangerous when you start to get to levels like 20% your body weight.
Or 15, even 10 to 15%, there's some danger there.
Right. So if I'm 180 pounds, which I'm not, but if I'm 180 pounds, 10% is 18 pounds, 20% would be 36 pounds. So that would mean that if I ran and I got on my scale at the end of my run, I'd be 180 minus 36, that'd be 144. I'd be 144 pounds. That's dangerous.
Yeah.
And that's where you start to get organ failure, when you start having that amount of dehydration. But typically, the dehydration that the literature is talking about, or even the lay literature, it's like 2%, 4%. That is not a dangerous level of, that organ failure is not going to happen at that level. It's going to be at the 10 to 20%.
Elite marathoners and elite triathletes routinely finish races 7, 8, 9% body weight loss.
Yep. Right.
And then go do a cool down run.
Yeah.
Right. They're not, yes, sometimes we see them collapse at the finish line, but the collapse at the finish line is not collapsing because of heat exhaustion. It's just purely just overall fatigue and the realization that they're done.
Yeah.
Right. If the race was another kilometer, they would have won another kilometer. Right?
Yeah. And actually, that's an interesting thing. When you collapse after the finish line, it's exercise associated collapse, meaning you stop exercising. And now the blood volume actually pools in your lower extremity, because during your exercise, your muscles are actually helping to circulate the blood. But if you just stop, now the blood pools. If the blood pools in your lower extremity, it's not in the head anymore, and you get lightheaded and you pass out.
But no, that's syncope. I'm not saying passing out. I'm saying just like they finish the race and they just lay down on the ground.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Right. I can't go another step. Right. And you know that if the race was longer, they could have went. They could have went more steps, but you're right about the syncope. And then I misspoke, John, on the other thing. It was actually every 1% body mass loss, you gain 0.22 degrees Celsius, and you're six beats higher. So, but if you think about that, if that's true, and then this is some good research on this, if you lost 10%, you'd only go up 2.2 degrees Celsius. Now, it is a lot, but that's 10%.
Yeah, right.
Right. And 2.2 is not enough to put you in heat stroke.
Right.
If everything else was equal, it's still significant.
And it could be enough to trigger the central governor to say, the governor doesn't want the core temperature going up. Yeah. And therefore, what am I going to do? I'm going to slow down to recruit muscles less to generate less heat.
So at the race this summer in Oregon, I was wearing the core temperature monitor, and for our longtime listeners, everyone maybe will remember I was sick going into the race, and the back half of the marathon, or the half marathon, I was up over 103 degrees Fahrenheit, and looking at my run splits, the hotter I got, the slower I went, and the worse I felt. Obviously, right? And the only thing that probably would have helped me keep going faster was to cool down.
Yeah, right.
But because I started with a higher core temperature and was, had a little bit of a fever, obviously still, I wasn't at a heat stroke level, but I was on the higher end of where your temperature should be. Right. And I can look at it and I can see, temperature goes up, speed goes down. And is it central governor, or is it just truly like the physiologic situation that's going on? Because also, heart rate went up as well. Considering heart rate goes up and then pace goes down at the same time.
No, that's great. And again, I'm giving credit to Max in the comments here. Another thing you could have done besides slow down is cool the blood.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this in the past. I think somewhere along the way is even holding ice in the hands.
And I was holding ice in my hands.
Yeah, right. And why ice in the hands is because of all the blood flow that the hands have, and so you're trying to get that ice as close to that blood flow as possible, that you're returning cooler blood back into the system. So cool mitts or
what I would have liked to have done is chugged a Slurpee.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. But they didn't have Slurpees on, at the aid station. Now, what I should have done is the run was kind of close to the river. Should have stopped for a minute, jumped in the river, and then jumped back out.
I did that in Zellamsey.
You've hung out in a river before during a race.
Yeah, I've had some problems with managing heat. So, but I had a heat injury during a race, and back in the 80s, and I don't think I ever was the same after that heat injury. So it's just hard to tolerate.
And we've talked about this on our podcast before many times, that one of the most important things during a race is to manage core temperature.
That's right. Right.
And if that means you need to go a little slower, good. If it means you need to take in some more cooler beverages, you should. But there is a fine line, and we'll give you, we'll talk about some kind of more take home messages here. But the most important thing, I think, when I'm talking to people about this, is number one rule is you do not gain weight during a race.
That's right. Right. If you eat more at the end of the race, you did something wrong.
But so then this goes back to training and prep, right? Is coming up with an individual plan so that doesn't happen. And you train, when you train, take your body weight before, take it afterwards. I know you're going to utilize some ATP and you're going to lose some fluid that way, or lose some weight that way, but you should come up with a way that you don't gain, you stay hydrated, right? But you don't gain body weight.
Right.
It is, if you do nothing else, the chances of you getting hyponatremic and basically having these really negative things, if you don't gain weight, the chances go way down.
Well, and I'll take it one step further. If you're the same weight, when
even still a problem,
you made a mistake because your fat and your carbohydrate has mass, and you are using that fat and carbohydrate to generate ATP. And so,
agreed.
If you end up at the same weight, you're overhydrated at that point.
Because our body, humans have evolved to do this, right? Our central system is so good that we have all these different hormones in our body that help protect us and help not urinate out. It help us do all of these different things to help, or to facilitate us to be able to do these things. But we can override them by drinking too much. And and I don't know if this is in Noak's book or what, but humans are the only animal that literally don't drink when they're thirsty, or can do this, right? Like someone could tell you to drink, and you can say, okay, my coach told me I need to drink this amount, so I'm going to drink this amount, and you could actually kill yourself by doing this. Right. My dog, we can go out on a walk, and I'll be like, or even in a run, because I run with Cosmo sometimes, and I'll stop. I'm like, okay, it's a time for us to have some water. I got a little cup for him and stuff, and he won't drink. Right? And it's like, aren't you thirsty? No, stick his nose right in. No, I'm good. Right? We have this innate ability to determine when we are going to drink. And is it drink to thirst? To a certain extent, that in my opinion, is one of the best mechanisms we have. Now, we do, the one caveat is in ultra endurance events, 5 hours and longer, there's some evidence to support that drink to thirst can go away. Right. And maybe you need a plan for after that. But for me, like in a half Ironman, I don't have a drink plan per se. I have a calorie plan.
Right.
I'm going to drink when I'm thirsty. I don't know how you handle shorter races like that. But.
Yeah, well, it depends on, like you started earlier, it depends on the environment. You know, in the summer for racing, even a sprint race, okay, then I'm taking some with me. But even
but you're gonna get thirsty and you're gonna want to drink.
That's right. That's right. But I also, this is where I need to be careful. Sometimes I'll chew, well, a lot of times I'll chew gum because I try to avoid that dry mouth during, you know, exercise in Las Vegas where it's hot and dry. And so that's interesting. I don't know how that influences my desire for thirst.
Yeah, may quell it. You don't know.
Yeah, that's right. Well, let's dive into this hydration bit a little bit more. And you brought up something which is in essence sweat rate. And you talk about weighing before and after. Can you talk a little bit about sweat rate and
so sweat rate's super, super interesting. Oh, I lost my camera there.
Yep.
I don't know what happened. So sweat rate's really, really interesting because number one thing, sweat rate is very individual. Okay. And everyone is going to sweat at a different rate. And there are some people that can go 5-6 liters per hour or over a gallon per hour in the right environments. And there's some people that will do a lot less. But once again, it is individual to the person, but it's also very, very individual to the effort that they're putting out and the temperature, right? So for example, if I had an athlete that I was saying, okay, we want to calculate your sweat rate for, you're going to go race in Kona, right? The only way to truly do that would be to mimic the environment in Kona, right? So 80 degrees, 80% humidity. Okay, so, and with radiant heating as well. So you need a sun lamp on you. And then we can calculate out how do you exercise for an hour at that, at your race intensity, right? So whatever that is going to be, and then we can potentially calculate your sweat rate. Now that is really, really hard to do. And a lot of people mess this up because they'll say, okay, you know, I'm going to get on my trainer and I'm going to ride for an hour, calculate my sweat rate. Well, that's perfect. If you're in your house at 72 degrees and 30% humidity and you know, that's that environment. And it's completely different when you go outside. And so some people, what they do is they calculate this, for example, in that exact environment. So 72 degrees, 30% humidity. And then they go and race, and that race starts at 7 a.m. And now it's 55 degrees and 30% humidity. And they're going to be drinking to the test that they did. And now, once again, they're overhydrating. And so calculating individual sweat rate is very, very, very difficult to do. And the other thing that's interesting is it changes as you adapt. So as you become more heat acclimatized, you'll actually sweat more, right? And people don't recognize that. They might do a sweat test. Oh, I'll do my sweat test in the spring. And then they acclimatize to heat and they're going to sweat more. And so sweat testing, like you got to be with somebody that knows what they're doing to help calculate this. And I got to tell you, these Gatorade sweat patches, they're BS, right? Because unless you're calculating all that stuff in, they're relatively useless in my opinion. And I'm not sponsored by Gatorade in any way.
Yeah, you just got your contract canceled. Yeah.
But hey, I think that's important, right? Because if we do it right, and then calculate out and say, hey, you know, by the end of the race, I'm okay losing 4-5-6% body weight. And if I calculate it properly, I can figure that out. But that being said, I don't do that. I've done it a few times where I just kind of wanted to know how much I lost in an hour, but I didn't mimic exactly the race that I was going to do and the conditions that I was going to do and the intensity I was going to do it at. Especially when we're talking about ultra endurance events, you know, very rarely do I go for a run at Ironman speed. Yeah. Right. Usually it's faster. I don't know, or slower even. Yeah, no, this is all great. I love everything you just covered. And I think that you
you mentioned the humidity part, and the reason why that is going to influence your sweat rate is because it does change how the sweat influences core temperature. Not, just to circle back to what we talked about before. And you're spot on, and this is a comment as well, that as you get more fit, you become more efficient at sweating, which means you sweat sooner and you'll sweat
and more volume. Yeah,
that's right. And so these are things that you need to be tracking. And so I know what you mean about the patch, but at the same time, I am looking forward to this technology advancing, because now it has to be something that you can use on a regular basis. And it can't just be, let me measure now, and then 3 months I'm going to use those data to make a hydration plan. That's not going to work. You need to be checking your sweat rate all the time. And so the quick way you mentioned to figure out sweat rate is to weigh yourself in the beginning, weigh yourself at the end, but now you also have to account for any fluids that you took in as well. And so it's this constant weighing, and I know you don't like to weigh yourself, but yet you've done this before. But what I do challenge people is a lot of times they have no idea what their sweat rate is.
Yeah. And but John, you're right. But in my opinion, or my understanding is the common thing that people are getting out of some magazines and blogs and online is that do this and then replace that amount. And that's not good, right? And the truth of the matter is, this is some interesting science too, is that faster people in races cannot bring in enough fluids to match. If they did, they would puke all over the place, right? So, for example, like a 3-hour marathoner in like ambient temperatures, like 70 degrees or so, let's say hypothetically they go 4 liters per hour. Can you imagine? That's a gallon. Can you imagine in 3 hours drinking 3 gallons of water as you're running a marathon at that pace? You just couldn't do it. Like you would be throwing up all over the place. And so with the faster runners and the faster athletes, especially running, we don't really see this. Once again, it's this, you mentioned it, people walking through aid stations, chugging water. Is ultimately more of the issue. But yeah, as far as the weighing in, weighing out, I don't do it. But I'm more of the thought of understanding myself and understanding the physiologic ramifications of exercising at different temperatures and going off of thirst.
No, I love it. And so this graph speaks exactly to what you were just talking about. And this is out of Tim Noakes's The Lore of Running. And on the y-axis is core temperature. It says rectal temperature. That's a common way to measure core temperature. The other way is an ingestible pill, which is what you and I have been playing around with. And on the x-axis is percent water deficit. All right, so this is in essence your dehydration. That further to the right is more dehydrated, and further up on the scale is higher core temperature. And so this is after some marathon data. My mouse is mixed up. So here are the race winners, and these are all different athletes doing the marathon. And the race winners were up here. And they were some of the highest dehydrated athletes, and they were the highest in core temperature.
But they didn't get above that 42, and that's the key.
That's right. And so one of the things that he talks about here is maybe elite athletes have to have an ability to tolerate higher core temperatures.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of thought on that right now, is that they actually have to, and with all the heat training that high level athletes are doing, and heat acclimatization training, sauna work, hot tub work, sitting in a sauna, sitting in a hot tub, is a really important thing for an elite athlete to do. And the thought is actually that some of it is mental. It's literally just, I can tolerate more temperature.
That's right.
Right. Yes, there are physiologic things that change, but there's a point when those physiologic changes kind of plateau, and the next plateau might actually be the mental side.
All right, so now let's talk about factors that influence how quickly the fluid goes from the bottle to your system.
Okay.
And this is an interesting thing because, if we think about digestion, even the carbohydrates that you take in, even in liquid format, has to go from exogenous outside your body into the stomach. But the digestion doesn't happen there. It happens in the slow intestine. So you have this gastric emptying. And we've talked about this before in a previous episode.
Yep.
You've got to get the stuff out of your stomach into the small intestine, where the majority of that absorption of fluids and carbohydrates really happens.
Yeah, and then the faster you're going or the harder you're working, the higher your RER, the slower it happens.
Yep.
And I think that's also an interesting one. And then the other thing is the temperature gradient makes a difference, right? So we want cool beverages to cool us down from the inside out. It's actually a really good idea. The cooler the beverage you can drink during a race, the better. But it will slow down absorption rate. It actually has to bring the body has to bring the temperature up to make that happen. So there are many, like, once again, many factors. So number one, intensity of exercise.
Yeah.
And then number two, glucose concentration is big as well, right? There's an optimal level of glucose concentration, and you have it here. Is it 6 to 8%? Is kind of optimal? Is that right?
I think that is. But and so again, this is data from Noakes Law of Running, and again, this is convenient. This is actually what we're just covered in my class this last couple of weeks. You're right. Glucose concentration is listed there, and you were just talking about fluid temperature that influences.
So too warm or too cold, by the way.
Yep.
It's not. It's not just. It's not one side or the other on that one.
That's right.
And then volume's important too.
That's right. And there is a preference of temperature too. That's an issue. Because this goes to what you speak to already, or spoke to already, is if you're drinking to thirst, I mean, there is a preference in terms of what will drive thirst. And if all you have is hot fluids and you don't want that, you're not gonna want to take that in, and vice versa. And then the volume ingested is actually, this is actually a pretty big factor, that you want to keep some fluid in your stomach to help with gastric emptying, because having volume in the stomach does promote having the fluid move. Not too much, because that's that slushing that you get during running, or that bloated feel that if you have.
It's a fine line. It's a fine line, and that's another one that you have to practice in training, and practice at, once again, the intensity that you're going to be racing at.
And so this graph over here is just talking about the different factors in terms of these here. So these bullets are just summarizing that.
So John, let's talk a little bit about something that we haven't touched on, and it's something that, man, I have so many arguments with people about this one, and in particular students. I hate to say I argue with my students, but I think just such misinformation, and that is about sodium. And sodium's role in this. So we've talked about hyponatremia, and hyponatremia is a lack of serum sodium. That's how we. I mean, that's the definition of it. So I think that sodium itself is such a tricky thing to fully understand. And I can't find any good research that points to that sodium supplementation while exercising actually makes a difference. And some of the literature we looked at in here showed that one of the people that had hyponatremia took in the most amount of sodium out of everyone. And there, I just can't find it. So that being said, I want to just go through something really quickly, and hopefully this will make my point. If you had a bucket of water, and let's imagine your body as a bucket of water. So you have this bucket of water, and that water has sodium in it. So our body, it's our main positively charged, what's it? Is it element? Mineral? Main positively charged mineral. And we sweat. Let's say you got, I don't know, let's say we have a liter we have more than a liter. So 1 liter of volume. In that, there's a certain amount of sodium, right? And it varies a little bit from person to person, but let's just hypothetically say it's not. Okay, let's hypothetically, we're just making the numbers easy. Say that it is 10% of that is sodium. 90% is water, 10% is sodium. If I sweat out way more water than I do sodium as a percentage, like significantly more. So let's say I sweat out of that, I sweat out 10% of the volume. I'll sweat out, 100 milliliters or 10% of it will be water, but it won't be 10% of the salt that goes out. It'll be like 1% of the salt that goes out. So when we sweat, even if you sweat, you're a salty sweater, you're actually increasing your body's sodium content. Okay. So you taking in, let's say you could take in a whole salt shaker worth of salt, which you can't, because nobody can basically stomach that. If you were to take that in, you're only increasing your sodium level at that point. And I think it's really, really interesting. So I saw an awesome lecture, a guy out of Michigan, Kevin Miller, and he is very, very well known in the athletic training world for his work in hyponatremia, in muscle cramping, mostly in muscle cramping. And basically the context was to, if you were to just do exercise for a couple hours, the amount of water you would lose, once again, maybe 4, 5, 6 liters. To replace the salt in it, you'd need like 16 to 18 Gatorades.
Yeah.
Right. To actually come back into balance. We're throwing we're throwing like, what's the word I'm looking at? Like little teaspoons of salt.
Garden hose to a fire or whatever that.
What you're actually taking in is nothing basically to the body. So I think that, triathletes in particular and ultra endurance runners are, I gotta have salt. I gotta have salt. I gotta have salt. You really don't need salt as part of this. Now, the one big part of salt is that it does increase thirst.
You took the words out of my mouth. That's what I was going to talk about.
That is the main thing. But remember, when you sweat out, you're actually increasing blood sodium levels, which is not a bad thing, right? Because that actually helps protect us from hyponatremia.
Yeah.
Right. So it is a tricky, it's a tricky little balance here, but and of course, like I take in some sodium when I'm exercising, but once again, I understand it's not to replace what I'm, my balance basically, even though I am sweating out or sweating some salt.
I love how you just put that all, because again, I'll rely on Noakes here, because I really respect the work and he's done in the endurance space. He's talked about how our diets are high enough in sodium that we have plenty of sodium when we are doing an event. And a lot of times when we see that heavy salter, where they have salt stains on their tri-kit or whatever, it just is more of a reflection of how much diet salt they have. But even at the end of the race, they're most likely fine with the amount of electrolyte in the system. And you're right, to take in, the fluid that would replace or increase the salt, it has to be a really salty. And there's one brand out there, I won't mention it, but it is one that does state that it is helpful to performance, but the amount of salt in that is just, it's almost unpalatable. It's amazing. So, but yeah, a lot of times the salt in the drink is really there to promote drinking, because it's like the pretzels in the bar. You have the pretzels in the bar because they want you to buy more beer.
And I think it's also important to note, and we had Lauren Dickey on our podcast a long time ago, and she's an expert in this area, and there's no evidence to support that salt prevents cramping.
Right, that's right.
And let's say I gotta have the salt to prevent the cramping. Well, if it did, it was because it was more anecdotal than anything else.
Yeah.
And there's tons of research on that where we take crampers and look at their blood sodium levels and non-crampers and blood sodium levels. There's no difference.
Yeah.
There's no difference.
No, that's amazing. Well, okay, so where are we leaving this?
I got some more take home. I got some more take home points. Just okay. A few things. So we said, if you want to measure, you can come up with a plan. Number 2, don't gain weight. Number 3, to kind of be safe, less than 700 milliliters per hour. So I know that's kind of a nebulous term, but there's some evidence to support that above 700 milliliters per hour, you're having a greater risk of having hyponatremia. So it's kind of just a kind of a rule to go off of.
Let's give a sense of what 700 milliliters is. Yeah, that's a water bottle. It's between a small and a large one.
That's like a medium-sized water bottle on your bike.
Yeah.
Be alert for physiologic and perceptual cues that discourage drinking. So things like your stomach is full, right? You're bloating, you vomit. Those are things that maybe you've taken in too much. Right. Guide drinking behavior with this in mind. Modest levels of dehydration, up to 2 to 3% of body weight, are tolerated well. Okay. It is okay. And very rarely at that point will you have a decline in exercise performance, especially in sports that weight is a factor. Right. So once again, we talked about running, we can talk about cycling. If you lose, let's say 3-4% of your body weight, your power output might decrease a little bit, but as a function of your weight in watts per kilogram, you actually will be probably it'll be a wash.
Yeah.
There is some evidence that, obviously, like you said, too much body weight loss is still a problem, right? And so we're not encouraging people to just go out and lose 10% of their body weight and not drink at all. Okay, so you got to be careful of that as well. And the other thing, go ahead.
I was just going to add an anecdote to that. I've done some long summer rides, and obviously you have as well. And I've tried to carry the water with me. I've taken 18 pounds of water, and I've lost that. I had 2 Camelback bladders in a bag, and multiple bottles. It all added up to 18 pounds. And by the end of the ride, I'd gone through all that fluid, and I didn't gain any weight.
Yeah, you probably lost weight.
Yeah, and that talks to how I always get worried when the recommendations from our big organizations are, drink, what is it, 2 glasses of water a day, whatever. I can't even think.
8 glasses a day.
Yeah. That is, you can't focus on an amount. You've got to on an amount that's going to apply to everybody. You've got to figure out what your sweat rate is and what you can tolerate.
And once again, looking at the other pieces, right? The temperature and
that's right.
And then the other one is big with me, and that is day to day. Okay. So if we're training in Las Vegas, for example, and every day you train 5-6 days in a row, and you're out killing it outside, and you can actually slowly get into a position where you're actually becoming more and more dehydrated, you're actually at more risk for getting heat stroke. And we do need to pay attention to that. It's really, really important. And the people that are most at risk of that are people that travel. So for example, traveling to Kona, right? Because, things are cooling down here and cooling down in North America. And then we race in October in Kona, and you're there for the week. And I'm acclimatizing. Well, you could potentially be setting yourself up that you actually been a little bit more dehydrated, a little bit more dehydrated, a little bit more dehydrated. And you can actually that can be dangerous. So we do need to pay attention to that. And I guess my big take home message here is we need to find the happy medium, right? We don't want to get too low, but we don't want to gain weight. And ultimately that's the key, is you want to find that happy medium, because too low, heat stroke and and the other association, or decreased performance because of dehydration. Too high, dangerous because of hyponatremia and vomiting and other and other issues. And it really does take a lot of, honestly, trial and error to figure these things out.
And core temperature. And everything you're spot on. But I always like to circle back to core temperature, because you can do other things to cool the body, and then you don't have as much reliance on taking in hydration. So, but yeah, this is a great topic.
Yeah, and I think, and I'm glad we're doing it today, honestly, because things are starting to cool down.
Yeah.
Right. And I've actually noticed some athletes, even when it gets cool, still try and drink the same amount. Oh, when I go out, I need to have a bottle every hour.
Yeah.
You don't need 700 milliliters an hour when it's 55, 65, 75 degrees. You just, maybe 75 you do, but you just don't need that amount. And just by, this is my prescription, is not a good thing. And like, I kind of go back to that animal model, right? Like, can get my dog to drink when he doesn't want to.
Yeah.
Drink when you want to. And then you'll be better off. And then one other thing we did talk about is, in my mind, this is the performance benefits that really come from drinking are the carbohydrates. Like actually getting the sugar in the most efficient way. And that to me, honestly, like, oftentimes I'm drinking because I want the calories, not because I need the water.
No, I like it. And so I think we need to come back and do another nutrition one. I know we've done a couple already, but I think that would be good to circle back and do that again at some point.
Yeah. The one other thing I'm going to throw out there is, when you look at, you take a group of endurance athletes, especially like triathletes or ultra runners, and you look at over time their blood serum sodium levels. You measure them serially. Oftentimes they actually start to decline down, and part of the issue is that they're honestly always overhydrated a little bit. And that's actually a little bit of a difficult one, because when we look at them on a blood test, it actually still falls into the normal range, but on the low end of normal. And so that's something to kind of keep an eye on if you do blood testing, is to look at where your sodium is on that blood test. And the problem with blood tests are, and you know this too, John, is it's a snapshot in time.
Yeah, right.
But if you see it like serially that your blood sodium is low, you might actually be chronically overhydrating. And that's something to kind of keep an eye on.
That's good.
Yeah, good stuff tonight.
It is, yeah. This is, from 56 kilograms of ATP to hydration. So that's.
Yeah, and the best part for you is you get to go to another session tonight and be educated more.
Yeah, there's the.
What do you got tonight? Yeah,
it's a student Jeopardy competition, so it's actually a fun. You
do
do this
that
with an ATA as well, and it's a fun way to apply your knowledge in a game format. And, it's funny, actually. I talked a little bit with students tonight about, isn't it weird that you're actually paying to go to a lecture now?
They're always paying.
Yeah, you are. But I mean, a lot of times when you're just doing your undergrad, you're looking for ways to get out of going to class. And now you're looking at ways to get to class in terms of a conference. And
the paradigm shift.
Yeah, but that's the way that you're in the right area. If you enjoy going and seeking out information, then I tell the students they're doing good, because they're finding their passion. So it's sort of fun. So it's going to be fun to go down and watch some of that and see what it's like.
So John, I just wanted one more thing to say, and that is, obviously with Ironman California's disappointment, I came to the realization today that I'm satisfied. I did all the training.
Yeah.
I was ready. I got to the start line healthy. I actually got to the start line. I was at the transition area when they canceled it. Yeah. And so it was one less day.
Yeah.
And so, I got myself an Ironman California bike jersey. I'm still going to wear it.
Yeah. That's good.
Like, I did all the work.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Just because the day didn't happen. I don't, yeah, at first I was pretty disappointed and upset about the whole thing, but I'm like, you know what? I accomplished what I needed to accomplish. And
I love that perspective.
yeah. And just because, you know, at the end, nobody said you're an Ironman, that's okay. I rode, I think 7 centuries in the last 3 months and did all these big runs and big swims, and I did the work. So right. I'm actually I'm feeling okay about it now. It took me a while.
That's good. Well, I love that perspective. And it's funny, actually, I was talking with someone down here about getting back into triathlon, and they said, I really enjoy the training. And that's exactly what I told them. I said, well, you have to enjoy the training because that's the journey. And if you don't enjoy the journey, you're not going to enjoy the destination. So it really is. And I love hearing that you talk about that. So that's great.
Yeah, I think that we need to put that into perspective. And I've been thinking a lot about it. And even if you race and you don't do well, like you don't do as well as you wanted, is that the important part? Or is it the journey that you took along the way? And each session that you did and the consistency and being proud of your training is, I think, is something that we need to really emphasize.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes, the races are fun and they're a good way to kind of measure yourself, but they're just one day.
Well, I messaged someone, I won't name this person, but I told them to go and celebrate that they were ready to toe the start line for Ironman. I mean, you had the bomb cyclone, you had cold temperatures, and yet you were still willing to be on the start line. Go celebrate that.
Yeah. And it's taken me a while to wrap my head around it.
Yeah, right.
Because when you're in the middle of it, and honestly, John, it was such a stressful week because we knew that weather was coming. And all of the extra things we did to prepare ourselves both physically and mentally, I honestly was drained this week.
Oh, and you had a course change.
Yeah, the night before.
And then all of a sudden you're going to deal with the course change. Okay, what does that change logistically? What do I got to do now? And then you wake up and then you go over and you're all ready to go. And
I didn't know about the course change till the morning I woke up, because at 8 o'clock, I turn off all my notifications. I turn off everything because I don't want to, I gotta, change my mindset to relax. And I say, so I wake up at like 4:30 in the morning or whatever it was. And I turn my phone on. I go, oh, course change. You know the difference of racing 56 miles on your bike and 112 miles on your bike?
Totally different.
Totally different mindset. And so as we're driving to start, I'm actually thinking about, okay, what is my wattage plan difference here? Because I've never contemplated riding 56 miles and then running a marathon.
Yeah, right.
I'm trying to figure it out. Like, what do I do here? And that's extra, like that's more stress. Right. Not to mention the wind and rain coming in like John, when we went to the transition area, I thought I was pretty well prepared. I thought like the jacket I had was appropriate for the morning. My pants were appropriate. Had a poncho on. In a half an hour we were out there, I was soaked and cold. Right? And everything I wore was soaked through. Like, because the way the wind was just driving this rain, like when they canceled it, I was so happy.
Well, and this is why I think when we talked about the week before, when I did do Norseman, I actually had Gore-Tex pants, had Gore-Tex boot cover, shoe cover, not even the neoprene, 100% waterproof, everything. Because once you get wet and it's cold, that's a long day. So
my Gore-Tex rain jacket was in my bike bag.
That's right.
Like I was prepared, like, 'cause I'm gonna get out of the water wet. I wasn't thinking I'd need another Gore-Tex rain jacket just to get to the start.
That's right.
Right. And no, you're absolutely right. And so anyways, I just wanted to share that perspective that I have now. And
that is great for people to hear. And I think that is I always talk about maturity of triathlete, and that's obviously the right way to look at it.
It took me a while to get there.
It
did. It really did. And so now I can just be, I'm cool, right?
That's good.
Is it weird that I needed a recovery week after not racing?
No, because I think it was the mental stress that you're literally going up and down, up and down. It's just, that is draining. So,
well, and then not knowing if we were going to get an Ironman Arizona spot, right? So that was the other thing, is like, well, I got to keep training because you never know. You might get a, oh man. Anyways, hey, John, enjoy the rest of your conference.
Yeah.
Have a great weekend. Are you coming back on Saturday or Sunday?
Yeah, I'll come back Saturday. So Saturday afternoon.
Supposed to be a lovely Halloween here, so happy Halloween.
Yeah. Yeah, I got my costume on right now.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome.
All right. Let me wait. Hold on. Where's my mouse? Because I've got two monitors that are not set up correctly.
And then, of course, I'm not watching it right now, but of course, we need to say go Rebels for the football game tonight.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Go Rebels. We've got to win that cannon. Okay. Talk soon, Ted.
Yeah, bye, John.
Bye-bye.